Today's text will be coming from 1 Kings chapter 17, and I will read verses 10 through 13 in your hearing. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering of sticks. And he called to her and said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. And she said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but an handful of meal in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. Verse 13, and Elijah said unto her, Fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. I'm going to read verse 13 again, where we'll be taking our text from, but I will pivot back to the other scriptures that we read. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. And if you will allow me to use for a subject message today, it would be entitled Paralyzed by Fear. Paralyzed by Fear. Elijah has just gotten to Zarephath per the instructions of God. He is informed, prior to getting to Zarephath, Elijah is informed that there would be a widow woman there to provide for him. And when he gets to the city, the widow woman is there. She's gathering sticks. And Elijah asks her to get him some water. Now, water is scarce at the time. Crop production is low because there is a drought that's going on. And the drought is so severe that it has resulted into a famine. So crops are low. Their production of crops are low, and water is scarce. So this drought has produced all of this. You want to talk about inflation at its finest. This was what they were dealing with. So if anybody did have any goods, it carried a great value with it. But because it was so scarce at the time, it was in their best interest to hold on to what they had, because they did not necessarily know when the drought or the famine would be over. So they were living off what they had. We can somewhat relate to that, having to live off bare minimums or to live off minimums because of the simple fact that there is a situation going on. And so therefore, the woman is experiencing this. Elijah is also experiencing this, and Elijah asks her for a drink of water. And on her way to get the water, he adds something to his request, or he adds something to his order. He said, while you're on the way to get the water that I asked for, he said, can you bring me just a little small piece of bread? And the scripture says a morsel. And we know that a morsel is something that is very, very small. Elijah was asking her for something that was very, very, very small in his eyes. And in our natural eyes, it would seem small. But how many of you know when the pressure is on you, something that is so small can seem like it's so big? Something that is so small can seem like it's so big. Even though it's small to some, it may look big to others. And when he modifies the request, he not only changes his request, but he changes the way that he is talking to her. Elijah shifts into the prophetic as he is changing his request. because in verse 11 he says, and as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thy hand. When he asked for the water, he said, just can you go get me some water? But when he's asking for the bread, he specifically said, the bread in thy hand. When he modifies the request, he shifts into the prophetic. He is prophetically calling out of her hand that which will be supernaturally provided into her hand. I'm going to say that again. He is prophetically calling out of her hand what will supernaturally be provided into her hand. There will always be a calling out before you are called into. Did somebody catch that? There will always be a calling out before you are called into. So if God is calling you into a life of abundance, that also means he's calling you out of a life of poverty. Come on here. Did somebody just catch that? If God is calling you into a life of abundance, that also means that he's calling you out of a life of poverty. So there will always be a calling out before you are called into. And it was not the water. Notice that Elijah did not shift into the prophetic with the water. The water was not what prompted the prophetic shift. She knew where the water was. She knew where the water was. But it was the meal or the bread that he was requesting from her that prompted the prophetic. The meal represented the area that was set aside for a specific reason or for specific people. Because in verse 12, she told Elijah, she said, yes, she said, I have this. She said, I have the bread. She said, I got some meal to make the bread. She said, but it is just for me and my son. That's all I got enough for. Is there anybody that can relate to God is calling me out? God is calling me out. There's been some things that God has been requesting from me, but because I could not see it, I had it set aside for a specific purpose. I had it set aside for specific people. I only had it allotted for me and mine. I was only going to use it for just what I saw fit to use it for. But in the process of that, God was calling me out of it. He was telling me to release it. He was telling me to release it. And I told him that I would, but I had it set aside for just me and my son. I had it set aside for these bills. I had it, I had this plate set aside just for my husband. And God, please don't ask me for that. And she told Elijah, she said, watch this. Elijah is asking her for it. Elijah is being the voice and the vessel of God. And Elijah is asking her for it. And she responded and she told Elijah, she says, and she said, verse 12, as the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in a barrel and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. She basically told Elijah, she said, there's so little of what I have that my son and I are prepared to eat it. And we know that this is going to be our last meal, because looking at the natural circumstances, it's bound to happen anyway. I don't see a way for us to make it past this. Can anybody relate to that? I know that God has been telling me to do this, but I just can't see my way past it. I can't, looking at the reality and looking at my natural circumstances, I can't see my way past what I see that is keeping me from doing what he said. God was trying to take the limits off of her, but before he could take the limits off of her, she had to take the limits off of him. Can somebody just type that over in the chat section for me? I got to take the limits off of him. I got to take the limits off of him. I got to take the limits off him because these limits are restricting. These limits got me to the place that I can't even, I can't do this. I can't do this. I know what he said, but I can't do this. I got to take the limits off of it. But I also want to go back and put emphasis on this. Now, Elijah has made the request to her. And Elijah has told her, bring me some water. Okay, she knew where the water was. So she didn't have a problem going to get the water. But when Elijah made the request for the bread, that's what tripped her up. Oh, come on here. Sometimes when God requests the bread from us, that's what really trips us up. It wasn't the water, it was the bread. But if Elijah was sent to Zarephath, and it's in verse 9 that I'm going to read in your hearing because I need for you to catch this. And in verse 9 it reads, when God is talking to Elijah, he told Elijah, he said, arise, get to Zarephath, which belongeth to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So when Elijah gets to Zarephath and he asks her for the water, she's on her way to get the water, and then he makes the request for the bread. The bread is what trips her up. But wait a minute now. If God had commanded her to sustain him, you would think that she wouldn't have any problem doing what she had already been commanded to do. Because we just read in verse 9 where she had been commanded to sustain him. She knew he was a man of God. You find that in verse 12 where she says, as the Lord thy God liveth, she said, I know that you are a man of God. If she was commanded to sustain him, she knew that he was a man of God. You would think that she would just trust what he was saying and do it without any hesitation, do it without any problem. I don't know how Elijah was feeling or what was going through his mind when he asked her for the bread. Okay, God, you did say it. When he asked her for the water, and she was going to get the water. Okay, God, you did say it. But when he asked her for the bread and she comes back and she tells Elijah, she said, I ain't got enough for you. She said, I got enough just for me and my son. And this is going to be our last meal. We are prepared to die. So it would not be baffling or it would not be out of the ordinary to ask the question, did God really command her as he had said? Did Elijah pick the wrong widow? Or was the widow woman just being rebellious? All of those questions based on her response could be legitimate questions. Did God really command her? Or was I just hearing things? Has anybody ever felt like that? Did I really hear God say that? Because I thought I did. And when I did it, it seems like things didn't go right. Or did I make the wrong choice? All of the questions that I suggested could have been legitimate questions to ask. But Elijah has an answer for us. And he tells us what the issue really is. He tells us what is keeping this woman from walking in the manifestation of limitlessness. And I'm going to read verse 13. And Elijah said unto her, fear not, Go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. So God did command her. And as Elijah was trusting the commandment that God had gave the widow woman, watch this. Up until this point, I need for you to understand, up until this point, the widow woman, at this point in the story, the widow woman did not have a fear of dying. I need for y'all to catch this. The widow woman did not have a fear of dying. Because in verse 12, she told Elijah, she said, I'm going to fix the little bit that I have, and I am prepared to die. So she did not have a fear of dying. She'd already told Elijah that. She had already accepted that. But according to what Elijah was telling us, the widow woman had a fear of living by faith. Oh, did somebody catch that? She did not have a fear of dying. She had a fear of living by faith. That's where some of us are. We already know, based upon what we have, the little that we have. I know what's going to happen with this. So I've accepted that this is just what it's going to be. But when I hear the words of the Lord, when I hear the message Sunday after Sunday, fear grips me. And it causes me to live in fear of living by faith. Because I can't see it. When she knew where the water was, she moved in that direction when he asked her for it. But when it got to the bread and she saw the little bit of meal that she had, she knew what was in her inventory. She said, it's just a little bit. It ain't even enough to do what he's asking me to do, and he's asking me to give it. I got some other stuff set aside for this. I can't see it. So she would have rather at that point, when we're dealing with this situation, she would have at that point rather lived with the limits than to live without faith. Than to live with faith, She would rather live with the limits of what she had, because that was something that she could figure out. That was something that she could see. That was something that her natural senses could detect. And so it was easy for her to know the outcome. But when I have to live by something that I can't see, it makes me scared because I can't see it. It makes me scared because I can't figure it out. And at that point, she would rather live in fear. And she would rather deal with the outcome of dying than to live by faith, trusting God. She had a fear of living by a power. I need for you to understand this. She had a fear of living by a power that can make anything that is impossible become possible. Oh, catch that. She had a fear. Watch this, because I need for you to understand your faith. Inside of your faith is the power to make the impossible possible. But I would rather live with these limits than to live by a power that has the ability to make my impossible situation become possible. So fear made her settle for dying. I want to ask you the question. What have your fears made you settle for? Just take a minute and ponder on that. Her fears made her settle for dying. So I want to ask you the question, what have your fears made you settle for? Have your fears made you settle for living from paycheck to paycheck? Have your fears made you settle for the diagnosis and the bad health? Because I'm scared now of changing my eating habits because I've been eating this way all my life and I'm scared of changing it because I don't know what it's going to taste like. I don't know what I'm going to eat if I can't have that piece of fried chicken. Watch this. I'm scared of what the new thing is going to taste like. Oh God. I'm so used to what I used to eat, giving me a certain sensation and making me feel a certain way that I'm scared of what the new thing is going to taste like. My fears have made me just settle for entanglements that I call relationships because I don't want to be hurt again. So I settle for giving myself to this one and to that one while avoiding the one who really wants me, the one that's going to do right by me. So I settle because I'm scared of being by myself because being by myself has a certain look to it. Being by myself makes me look like something probably is wrong with me. And because I don't want to look like there's something wrong with me, I just jump from one person to the other person because I'm really just scared. And I've accepted these entanglements that I call relationships. All because I do not want to fight the feeling of being alone. I don't want to look like I ain't really got it all together. So I will stay in the cycles rather than to break the cycles. Because as long as I'm in the cycle, I know what's going to happen. I know what to expect. As long as I'm in the cycle. I don't have to hope in the cycle because I know what's going to happen. I don't have to trust in the cycle. While I'm in the cycle, I don't have to trust because I know what's going to happen. I would rather stay in the cycle than to have to hope and trust. Because what if? What if? What if? And Elijah, he knew that she could not move in the things of God until he dealt with the thing that was paralyzing her. And in verse 13, the first thing Elijah said unto her, he said, fear not. Fear was paralyzing her. If anybody can relate to that, just give me a virtual hand wave or tap it over in the chat section. Yeah, that's me. I know that God has told me to let some things go. I know that God has told me to do some things, but fear has got a grip on me. Fear is paralyzing me that I won't even move into the things of God. And guess what? If we can just be honest with ourselves, the fear that was produced by the reality of her situation, it was warranted. She said, all I got is this little bit of meal, this little bit of meal. It's a little bit. And have you seen my son? Have you seen how big my boy is? It ain't enough for me and him. And now you talking about give you some? It ain't enough. You see this little bit of oil? You talking about make some for me and thee and thou and thou? And us and we? You see this? It ain't enough. It ain't enough. But you want me to break the cycle? You want me? My fear is real. I need for somebody to catch that. Your fear is real. But your fear is never more powerful than your God. Oh, come on here. I need for somebody to catch that, because you've been thinking that your fear is so real that it's more powerful than your God. Yes, your fear is real, but your fear is not more powerful than the God that you serve. I've been getting messed up because I've been thinking that my fear had more power than God. And like the widow woman, we all have some situations that are telling us to be afraid. The fear is real. My finances are telling me to be afraid because I ain't got enough. My insecurities are telling me to be afraid because I'm not enough. My past disappointments are telling me to be afraid of failing. Well, I tried the restaurant business one time. I tried cooking one time. Do you know how many people cook? Yes, but do you also know how many brands of potato chips that are on the shelf in the grocery store every day, and people still pick the ones that fits their taste? Failed relationships got me scared of loving and trusting. So these fears have me in a cycle that I won't even do what God says because I'm scared. I'm not telling you that your fear is not real. I'm not telling you that your fear is not warranted. What I am telling you is that your fear does not have more power than the God that you serve. Can I just get somebody to lift up holy hands right there? Yes, my fear is real, but my fear is not more powerful than the God that I serve. I have a deep feel of adoration for God. I read about him. I tell him thank you every day. I even sing about him, but I'm scared. I read my word, but I'm scared. I'll even tell somebody else how good he is, but I'm scared. I'll tell somebody else that God can do it for them, but I'm really scared and wondering if he gonna do it for me. What's that about? Paralyzed by fear. But look at how Elijah addresses her fear. And he tells her how to get over her fear. And Elijah said unto her, he said, fear not. Elijah was not telling her not to be scared. alone. He said, don't be so scared that he said, don't have such a deep feeling of fear that it keeps you from doing what God has told you to do. He basically said, because your fear is really warranted based upon what you just described and what you're looking at. Look, what some of us are looking at, it's enough to be scared. Come on here. Let's just be truthful about it. It's enough to be scared. But Elijah said, don't be so caught up with being fearful that you won't obey. He said, don't give your fear more power than God. Now, how do I do that? How do I let the power of God override the feeling that is produced by my reality? How do I let the power of God override the feeling that is produced by my reality? Because what I need for you to understand, I can see my reality. I can see that ain't nothing but a little bit in here. I can see all of this. And it's talking strong to me. And if I let fear take control, the fear will make me settle for dying when God has called me to live. The fear will make you settle for dying when God has called you to live. But how did Elijah get her to move past the reality that she was looking at? How do I move past the fact that I don't have enough? How do I move past the fact that I feel like I'm not good enough? How do I move past the fact and the reality that tells me that I'm going to always have to rob Peter to pay Paul while John is waiting? How do I move past that? Remember what we said. God, before God calls you into something, he will always call you out of something. There are some of you that cannot walk in the financial liberty and freedom that God has called you to walk into because your fear is paralyzing you. There are some of us that will never be able to have those relationships because fear grips us. Fear tells us it's too late. Fear tells me I'm too old to go back to school. But Elijah said the way that you overcome this, he said, you just got to do what God is telling you to do. That's how you overcome fear. This is what he said. Elijah said unto her, he said, fear not. He said, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first. Elijah is bringing her back to what she has been commanded to do. She was commanded in verse 9. Elijah said, the way that you overcome your fear that has kept you in the cycle, he said, you just got to go do it. You got to let your fear of what won't happen be outweighed by what God has promised. Oh God. You got to let your fear of what won't happen be outweighed by what God has promised. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Because God told her, he said, you're going to sustain the man of God. This is some of us. You're going to sustain the man of God. You're going to live according to my word. For a little bit. Said, don't do it. It ain't enough. You better keep it for yourself. Well, wait a minute. If it already ain't enough, and I do not have a promise, I ain't got no promise over this. Apart from what he said, I ain't got no promise. Just being with me, I can't make nothing happen. But God was calling it out of her. Some of you's like, I ain't got nothing but a little bit. I'm trying to call you out of the little into the plenty. So she looked at it and she said, I don't have enough. And Elijah said, fear not. He said, walk in obedience. So she goes home and she's looking at what she got. I can imagine how she felt, shaking every, oh, I can't waste that. I got to put that. Y'all know how we do. We got to put that in the bowl too. I can't waste that. I'm scared. Okay. As she's getting ready to do what God says she was going to do. But wait a minute, Elijah just didn't tell her to go do it. Elijah gave her a promise with it. And in verse 14, after he told her what to do, he said, for thus saith the Lord God of Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail. I'm going to stop right there for a minute. It says, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail. And I'm sure when she went home, Elijah said, go do what God told you to do. And every time she dipped a spoon out, the barrel of meal shall not waste. Come on here. I'm trying to help some of y'all walk in obedience so you can walk into the limitlessness that God has purposed and planned for your life. Because there's been some things that you've been holding on to and God is trying to call you out of them. But this is where you got to let your fear, your faith override your fear. And every time you do what God has told you to do, you got to remind yourself of what his promise is concerning you. The barrel of meal, every time she dipped the spoon, the barrel of meal shall not waste. The barrel of meal shall not waste. The barrel of meal shall not waste. She was only able to remind herself of that as she was doing. Come on here. That's when her faith, watch this, was starting. Every time she was doing what God had commanded her to do, all she was doing was activating her impossible, her power to make the impossible things become possible. Because every time you do what God has told you to do, all you are doing is activating your power to make the impossible things in your life become possible. So she's dipping out. Did somebody just catch that? Every time you do what God is telling you to do, all you are doing is activating your power to make the impossible things become possible in your life. And so she's dipping out the meal. And now Elijah just did not prophesy to her about the meal. He also said the oil. So I got to use this other area over here too. And I got to pour some oil in here because it takes all of that to make the bread that God is calling me to make. It's going to take everything. It's going to take everything. And I'm mixing it up. I don't know how, but the barrel of meal, watch this, the barrel of meal shall not wait. The cruse of oil, it's getting low. It's getting low, but it ain't going to waste. I hope somebody is catching this. It ain't going to waste. And she did it. And she did it. And she did it day after day, after day, after day. She did it. She did it. I'm getting low. I'm getting low. Oh God. Oh God. But I'm on the barrel of meal. The barrel of meal shall not wait. Neither shall the cruse of oil fail. It's God. I can imagine her going in there every day. God. I got some. See, the thing that was causing her to operate in fear was the thing that she couldn't see. It was the thing that she couldn't see, because what she couldn't see is that God had a whole nother supply for her. Come on here. I need for y'all to see this. God had a whole nother supply for her that she couldn't see. Because watch this. Based upon what she could see, she had some reserves about doing what God had asked her to do. But what God was telling her was, what God is telling you is, I got a whole nother reserve that is waiting to tap into your supply. Come on here. Did somebody just catch that? I got a whole nother. I got more than what you giving. Did y'all see this? I was limited to the jar. But my faith had me, my fear had me limited to the jar. But my faith was going to connect me to the limitless supply. I got to say that again. My fear had me connected to the jar, to the barrel. But my faith connected me to the limitless supply of what God had purposed for me. And my faith, this is what my faith does. My faith connects the supply. Oh, y'all got to follow me. My faith connects me. I need for Life Meets the Word to talk back to me, because if y'all are understanding what God is showing us, your faith is connecting you to the supply, that every time you need a little bit more, your faith is going to connect you with it, because you did what God has said. If y'all are understanding that, give me a virtual hand wave or type it over in the chat section. I'm connected. My faith got me connected. My faith got me connected. I was scared to do what God had told me to do, but I did not understand the power that was really in my faith, because my faith was connecting me. My faith was breaking the paralyzation of just being limited to having enough for me and mine. I don't know if y'all just caught that. My faith was breaking me from the limits of just having enough for me and mine. And as I was getting this ready, and God just gave me this about the flour and the oil this morning, and I was choosing which oil to get, and I heard the Lord, he said, get this one. My nephew can appreciate this because if any of y'all know my nephew, he's a great value man. He's a great value man. But I heard the Lord says, get the one that the seal has not been broken on. And as I was getting this, I heard the Lord say, because I'm about to break open some stuff for some of y'all. I'm about to break open some stuff. I'm about to break open some stuff because your fear, your fear had you paralyzed, but your faith connected you to a source that's going to cause God to break open some things for you and pour in to your, he going to pour into your resources. And every day she went back. Every day she went back. Her faith had connected her. Her faith had connected her. Her faith had connected her. And she was able to go back. And she was able to do this. Come on here. Over and over and over and over and over again was she able to do this. I need for y'all to catch this. You're going to be able to do this over and over and over and over and over again. Because I decree and I declare unto you, y'all know it's going to be to the point. You was wondering why God just didn't fill it all the way up at one time. He said, I didn't fill it all the way up because I didn't want you out here just wasting stuff. I just didn't want you out here wasting stuff. He said, so that's why I had to let you use your faith to supply it every day. Every day. Every day. Because I couldn't have you out here just wasting stuff. And I had to prepare your mind for it. Oh, did y'all get that? Did y'all get that? Your mind has got to be prepared to receive this so you don't waste it. So you don't waste it. I got a few more things to tell you. Oh, God. I heard God say this to me to share with you. He said, some of the stuff that he is asking you for, he never intended for you to live without it. Oh, God. I need for somebody to catch that. The relationship that he asked you to give up, he didn't ask you to give it up because he didn't want you to have somebody. He just didn't want you to have that one. Come on here. Some of the stuff that God is asking you for, he was asking the widow woman for the meal. But if you look at the scripture, if you look at the word, it was not the meal that he was trying to get her to live without. He was trying to get her to live a life without fear. Oh, I need for somebody to catch that. Oh, God. So when he asked you to give up the relationship, when he asked you to give up certain foods that was hurting you, when he asked you to give up the money, when he asked you to give up whatever it was that he asked you to give up, he wasn't asking you to give it up because he intended for you to live without it. He said, I asked you to give it up because I wanted you to live a life without fear of thinking that I would not do what I have already promised you I would do. I was trying to get you to live without fear. Oh my God. Did somebody catch that? I wasn't asking you to be alone for the rest of your life. I was asking you to believe me in that area so you wouldn't have to live in fear for the rest of your life. Your area may not be my area, and my area may not be your area. But if it's one thing that all of our areas do have in common, our areas have the common denominator of fear. Do I? Should I? I don't know. Will he? And God is saying, that's the thing that I'm trying to get you to live without. I know you need money. I got that. I know you need finances. I got that. I know you desire relationship and intimacy. I got that. But if your fears, if you hold on to your fears will convince you that I can't do it. Your fears will convince you that I won't do it. Your fears will paralyze you. But I came as a spokesman for God on today. And I want to challenge you, just like Elijah did with the widow woman. I want to encourage you to fear not. Do as God has told you to do. But not just do what God told you to do. He said, do that first. He said, give what God has told you to do. He said, give it priority in your life. Come on here. And I want to read to you what happened. As she moved past her fear and the grips of fear that was paralyzing her. Verse 15 says, and she went and did according to the sayings of Elijah. And she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Elijah. In my closing, you don't have to live without it. Just because God is calling it from you, it does not mean that he intends for you to live without it. He's calling it from you because your fear is attached to it. Oh, come on here. And as long as your fear of living without it is attached to it, it will paralyze you from moving in the things of God.